All right, so I'm Jess. We're here with Shari and Ken, and we Shari and I both saw Ken on John Vervaeke's channel and wanted to talk to him, but we don't know anything about each other. So why don't we do like short introductions of like who we are and how we found ourselves in this corner of the internet?
Is that
You want to go first, Shari? What?
Is that going to be short? We're turning into old.
It's going to be the whole thing. It'll just be our introductions.
Jordan Peterson, Paul Vanderklay, John Vervaeke. Well, no, John Peugeot's somewhere in there. and now, how's that for a summary?
That's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, mine. I'll fill out mine a little bit more than that. So I grew up basically fundamentalist Christian with a lot of people who were tremendously sincere about what they were trying to do, but they were trying to do it from a modern frame of understanding the world that just tied them into a really, really tight ego space. And so I felt very constrained by that. So I did a large deconstruction, kind of following a move to evangelical Christianity. But I have always retained a pretty deep biblical framework just of my whole frame of reality. So Jordan Peterson kind of started to open me up a lot more to moving outside of the modern framework. And then Jonathan Pajot kind of just started breaking apart a bunch of the issues with getting stuck in words as frames, really, is what I would say, and being able to actually think symbolically. Another huge piece of my journey and kind of the basis of the metaphors I use on my YouTube channel is Mount Analog by René Dumas. I don't know if you guys have read that book. No. It's very similar to a lot of the way that Pajot thinks in terms of patterns of reality and using analogous thinking to kind of map the world. Yeah, and then now I just, Vervaeke's work really was where things really just all came together for me. And that's what I was starting to open up to him when we were talking about. It's the time constraints are interesting because you have to like really pare things down. But yeah, his work has afforded me a ton of tools. And so now I just kind of try to find people who are also climbing on this mountain, as it were, and who are just fun to climb with and help me see more of reality. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah, same here, actually. It's a good way to put it. All right, Jess, your go.
Okay. I grew up evangelical Christian. My parents became Christians when I was a kid. And then they went into full-time ministry when I was a teenager. So they became missionaries with a non-denominational sort of evangelical missions organization. And so a lot of my teenage years was spent thinking about evangelism, cross-cultural missions. We spent some time overseas, not too long, like a month or two at a time. And then as I was like growing up in that, I just figured that's what I'd do for the rest of my life, but I'd be a missionary. And I've always been kind of a mystical person, so I had some pretty profound experiences regarding all that, and I ended up leaving missions to pursue creative production, music production, and then that led to me meeting my wife and having a family. And through all that, leaving ministry, which was like in my early 20s, so I'm like 42 now. So in my early 20s, leaving ministry and then starting a family and doing career, and I kind of had a internal deconstruction period where like we were still going to church and stuff, but I was like leaving no rock unturned. I had good friends that had become atheists, and they had good reasons to become atheists, and I couldn't fault them for becoming atheists. And the new atheist thing was happening. This was in the early 2000s, and everyone was being really hard on Christianity. And then the emergent church and sort of the postmodern critique had finally sort of was hitting evangelical churches and evangelical thinkers. And so that I was part of that too. And so I had my sort of deconstruction that's sort of left me undone a little bit. Started, I was reading Marx. I was like trying to figure stuff out. I was trying to, seem like justice was a good narrative to kind of get behind. And then Jordan Peterson came along, kind of helped. It was basically like, there were always at least two sides that I was dealing with of things. It's like secularism and religion, or God and atheism, and evolution and creation, and all those things that. And then Jordan Peterson just smashed them all together. It was like, it's all the same thing. And and then I ran into Peugeot, and then into Vanderklay and Vervaeke, which led me to this corner here. And I've been talking with Shari and other people for years now. So yeah.
Yeah, we're going on 2 years. Now I feel like my thing was like way too condensed.
It was way too condensed. Do you want to?
I'm a little chilly. Let me grab a blanket here for some reason.
Sure.
I also need to turn on my air conditioning, or else I'm going to burn up in a second.
Weird. One's freezing and the other one's too hot.
Now, somehow it's still raining in Oregon in the middle of June. So
yeah,
like 100 degrees here. So
interior of BC, and I woke up this morning and it was thick fog and 5 degrees Celsius.
Oh man.
Oh geez.
Yeah, it was like my husband said, "Happy fall."
I know it's been March for 3 months here.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's just been cold. I said to my a friend yesterday, I said, "Well, it's been so cool." She goes, "No, cold. It's been cold." Yeah. Anyway, okay. Well, I'll try to keep this short. I was born in the 60s and went through the 70s as a teenager, and then my parents became Christians in the late 70s. They got into a very conservative fundamental church called the Plymouth Brethren, and then it was assumed that I was just going to just jump on board, and at the age of 14 and a half or whatever, and that didn't really happen. I left home at 17, and then when I was 19, I got pregnant, and then I had a kid, and I thought, well, I'm going to read the Bible as a textbook just to help me figure out how to, save this child from all the terrible things that I've been through, right? And I ended up, like, I don't know, I have no other way of expressing it except that I met Christ. I was reading Matthew. I started Matthew, and by the time I got to John, I felt like I was in love. Like I did. I felt like I was in love with someone, and it was really intimate. And it was really personal, and I didn't share it with anybody. I didn't tell anyone because it was almost magical, and I didn't want anyone to know. Yeah, and then I, met my husband, got married, moved to Switzerland, had 2 more children, and then after 11 years in Switzerland, we moved to the far reaches of northern Canada, like just below the Yukon border. We did a bunch of homesteading there for 3 years. And at that time, we had gone to church on a regular basis in Switzerland. It was also kind of like a Mennonite Brethren type church. And then we got to Telegraph Creek and there was no church there. So we met other people who were meeting in their homes. So we started doing that, and then it got really weird. And then my husband, and things had gone kind of weird in Switzerland at that church too. It just made us feel like, what is this? What is this all about, this going to church? Like, what is it actually, right? Anyway, so then we were in Telegraph Creek and this thing happens with these people. And then my husband and I both said, that's it, we're done. Not with Christianity in any way, shape or form, but just going to church, where we're just done. And then we moved after 3 years in Telegraph, we moved here where we are now. We moved here in 2000 and I haven't been to church since 1996. So, and I just last weekend got baptized into the Orthodox Church.
Oh,
Like huge. Okay. Like it's huge.
yeah.
Huge.
Wow.
Yeah, so I don't know, whenever that was that Jordan Peterson appeared on the scene, he caught my attention. I was just watching, actually just before, like half an hour ago, I started watching the new Pajot Peterson video of the thing they did together for his new book in Montreal.
Oh, is this new?
It's brand new, yeah, today.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, no.
Pajot said, when he first heard Jordan talking on CBC radio, he was in his car and he said, I started pounding on my steering wheel and screaming because this guy was talking about the logos. And he goes, you never hear about the logos on CBC radio, right? And that's kind of how it happened to me. I heard him on the news, on the CBC news, and I heard him talking and I was like, what? Like, and all these little things started happening in my head.
Like, whoa, there's a real player online all of a sudden.
Yeah, and like the years that I spent outside of church, I was not outside of church. I was within the church of creation. I don't know how else to express it, right?
You're a mystic.
Because you're homesteading.
Yeah, I'm living in nature. I'm homesteading. I'm connected to the land. I'm tuned into the seasons. I'm fully dependent on myself to make things work or live without them, one or the other, you know. And because we were like in Telegraph, we were totally off grid, and we've always self-sustained. And my husband has only worked just to keep us going, you know. So we lived very, very frugally, right?
There's a way in which, if I can interject, there's a way in which it sounds like you've at least in the way that I would define mystic, which is something like a person who does not have to go somewhere to meet with God, but meets with God in the moments of his life throughout everything.
Yeah,
that's kind of the lifestyle that it seems like you've been trying to cultivate.
yeah, and actually it cultivated me. Like that's how I would put it. Like I don't feel like I had a whole bunch of, I wasn't trying to do anything. I was just gardening. I was just surviving. I was, you know, and trying to raise my kids and give them the tools they need to navigate life, you know. I was talking to someone on the weekend about prayer, and in the Orthodox Church, prayer is much different than what I'm familiar with, right? Growing up as a Protestant. So, and I've got my icon corner and I've got my stuff going on, you know, and I'm like, I need someone to teach me how to do this right, you know. And then they said, well, you know, ideally you'd be praying as a conversation with God, like all day long. That's really what most people struggle with. And I'm like, well, not me. That's how I've always been, right? I was just constantly talking to God, and here I am trying to struggle with the I don't know, what do you call it? The
liturgical prayer.
Yeah, or the more institutionalized, maybe, you know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Can I pick up here and ask, because I would like to zoom in on this and gain insight, because you're in a place where there's, so I feel like I have been in a place that's very similar to where you have been, which is where I've moved into the space that is very mystical in the way that I just described.
Mhm.
And I look at the church, especially the Orthodox Church, as being like, I get what Pajot has to say about it. I get the picture. I get what's going on there in this movement of a collective, the ecclesia and all this stuff. But I'm also I also recognize a deep sense of constraint that arises for me when I actually consider experience, like existentially putting myself into it, because what I do not want to ever lose now is the ability to take off any set of propositional glasses.
Mhm.
And that for me is probably is the biggest sticking point, is like, I don't want to move into a space where I am unable to have the freedom to follow the logos wherever it takes me, even if it is outside of some. So how does that, if that maps for you, and if so, could you talk about it and how you reconcile
I've actually been thinking about that, because when I say it's a huge deal for me to get into this church, to want to even get into this church. Okay, like I kept going, are you alive? Because like, is there something wrong with you?
Yeah, because it's not like you moved away from the church for shallow reasons. Like
No,
it wasn't that you just didn't care about Christianity. Like, you moved away from it because in order to follow Christ, you needed to leave the church.
exactly. That's right. Yeah. And I was following the logos wherever it went, like literally chasing butterflies. And but thinking about it now, what I didn't have, and I think you actually said this in your conversation, was, I don't know how you put it. I should look at my notes because I probably wrote it down.
You wrote everything in your notes, though.
I wrote everything.
That's the problem with notes sometimes,
It was like you didn't feel that where you were standing was real, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the way I feel about the way I would describe that is that it's bottomless. Like I feel like I could fall because I'm not standing on anything. I'm not anywhere, right? And so when I'm in creation, I'm standing on the earth and I'm under the dome, right? And I know where I am. I see myself there, right? And that is actually what the Orthodox Church affords me too. They have a floor, right? It's really basic, the floor of the Orthodox Church, the dogma, It doesn't ask a whole lot of you, actually. It's basically the Nicene Creed, But then overhead you have the dome, right? And it's filled with stars. It's literally covered in stars, like if you look up at the dome in the Orthodox Church. And so for me, I recognized that place. I recognized it, and it was familiar to me. And I had already been reading some of the early church fathers, Origen to be specific, and it was cosmic, right? What I was reading. And I just thought, yeah, this is where the cosmic Christ resides within Christianity. I couldn't find it anywhere else. I couldn't find it. There was always some portion of it cut off or cut out, like a cropped photo and enlarged or something like that.
That's exactly the metaphor that I use all the time.
Really?
Yeah, is that the Christian story, really the Christian story is the limitless view of all things.
Yeah.
And that especially what I was raised with, and then what I experienced in evangelical Christianity, is this strange, like it is kind of the heart of it, but it's from a strange angle, and that's all there is. And somehow it's not attached to everything else.
No, it's cropped and then enlarged, And you're only looking at like one little aspect of Christ.
But it's super low resolution, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
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 Okay, so there's like so many places we can jump in here. So maybe we should like step back and orient a little bit. What direction do we want to go here?
Well, I like the idea of like you were talking about following the logos wherever it goes, and I have like a part of my story is that I was I was in this missions organization. My parents were in it, um, and so it was a mission organization called YWAM. I don't know if you know about them, Youth with the Mission.
Yep.
So one of the key sort of principles in YWAM is hearing the voice of God. So it's like listen to God's voice. The Holy Spirit can speak to you, and then go do what he says. And so like there's I joke with my dad, like this is the strength of YWAM and also its weakness, because in YWAM you can do whatever you want, and then the weakness is that everyone's just doing whatever they want. So like it doesn't reach the organizational level of like the Southern Baptist mission, where it is like a top-down hierarchical structure, and they will get resources and people to places to do some amazing things like disaster relief and other things that YWAM can't, because they're just not set up for that. But in YWAM, people are doing all kinds of interesting things, as well as terrible things, that people need to be like, stop doing that. That's not good. But my experience there was good. My experience was like positive. And I just figured like I was going to do that for the rest of my life, because I figured I'll just listen to the voice of God and he'll tell me what to do. And then that's it. Like God just wants willing servants, right? And so I was bound and determined to live by that. And then I figured like what could be the highest thing I could point myself towards than to try to go into all the world and preach the good news. And so unless there's something higher, then I'll go do that. But this seems as high as I can go, and seem like a foolproof sort of plan. And there's it's sometimes hard to explain like how much sort of zeal and stuff is in it. There's sort of this youthful zeal about going out and doing this work, and being full of the Holy Spirit and God using you. And I've been in all sorts of situations and seeing God do all kinds of things, and it was incredible. We'd have these huge conferences. We'd have hundreds of people at these conferences. It's rock and roll and inspirational speakers saying like, go, who's going to go? Let's go. And so that was all like kind of just like building up in me. Like I can still just sort of imagine it like I was there right now. So it all came to a head though, because there were several years where God wasn't telling me what to do. and everything I was trying to do mission wise wasn't working. So here an example is like everyone in YWAM is self-funded. So you fundraise for yourself. You raise money from friends, family, your church, and they give to you monthly, and that's how you make an income. But I was basically raised all my teenage life in missions, so all my friends were missionaries, everyone I knew. And then anyone that I knew that wasn't a missionary was already supporting my parents. And so like yeah, and so like there was, I think at one time I had one supporter that was supporting me $50 a month, and I was like, all right. And so I was like working at a coffee shop, and then I was like, well, let me go take some college classes, because I wasn't really finding a place in ministry that was working for me. And so I was in like business school, and I was just like, I was kind of just really struggling. And it all came to a head, and I was like, God, what do you want me to do? Just tell me what it is and I'll go do it. Just freaking tell me. like, um, like, and I heard as clear as day. He's like, well, what do you want to do? I'm getting choked up.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's like, oh my gosh, that's such a beautiful moment,
Yeah.
right? Because and the thing that's so cool about that moment is that it wasn't you projecting a version of yourself that wanted to do the thing and wanted to hear from God. You were actually like fully there, and you had run it out. Like you would run out the course of where this could take you, right?
Yeah.
I went all the way to the end.
Yeah, and then at the end, instead, like that's the moment that you face the choice of, are you going to turn around and become a materialistic atheist and say, screw it, this is all bullshit. Sorry, excuse my language.
Yeah.
But or are you going to say, no, like, I choose the good. I don't know what the good is, even if it's not the model that I've been held. I choose the good.
Yeah. Well, and what was funny about that moment is I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Like, it was like, it came to me like this, and it wasn't missions. It was, I wanted to play music and produce music. And God, like, so I just told him that. And then God was like, go do it. And
That's so cool.
Yeah. And so, we it's funny because like we had these these prayer services like during the week on the YWAM campus. And so at one of these, usually like when people could get up and share or pray or whatever. So I got up and I, usually someone would come up and say like, God's called me to Tibet. I'm going to go to Tibet. And we pray for them and kind of celebrate.
I mean, what a place for God to call you to, man. Like, yes.
Yeah. So this is like normal. Like, and so I got up and I said, I'm not called to go anymore. So I said, I'm not called to missions, and I'm going to go produce music. And everyone was just like, yeah. But I was like, it was like my anti-sending. I was like, I'm not going. And they're like, all right.
Wow, that's so cool. Actually, that's so cool that you actually did that though, right? Because that's even better, because you're like, there's a way in which, at least from what I'm hearing, is you were so like, it was so authentic for you what had happened, that there was no fear of ridicule for you to actually get up there and do it, because you didn't have anything to defend.
Yeah. And it was like, talk about free of the propositional. Like, I had lost all my propositional framework at that point, and I was literally just trying to follow the logos, and the logos asked me what I wanted. Jesus is asking people that. They're like, he's like, what do you want?
Yeah.
And he'll be like, we see stories like that all the time. And so that happened to me. And so I left missions, and there was another moment, which I think is relevant to all this sort of the theme here, is I had found an audio engineering school that I was going to go to, and it was in Arizona. And so I did a bunch of mountain biking when I was in Colorado. So I was out mountain biking, and I stopped. I was kind of like taking in the view, and probably going to choke up on this one too. But I just asked God. I said, I was like, because I had this eerie feeling that I was like, I was like seriously stepping out into the unknown, because like, God wasn't going to tell me what to do. And I was literally leaving ministry and going into the world, like into the music industry of all things. And I was like a little bit like there was an eerie feeling about it. And so like, I remember stopping there on my bike, looking out, and I was like, God, you're letting me go, aren't you? And he said, yeah, but you'll get to know me better than you would have otherwise.
So beautiful.
Dang, that is so cool. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
yes.
Like that was the precipice of all my deconstruction and everything. Like after that, the next 10 years was, I don't know what was happening half the time. Like I never fell into any, I never started doing drugs, or, I never had a crazy girlfriend that we started living together or anything. Like I was basically living the same Christian life. And I was still going to church. I still found community in like church situations. But it was never in the institution itself. Like I never really cared about theology and, especially academic style theology. I just wanted a community to be a part of. And so church was a place I could easily find, it was pretty easy to find a community of people. And if the people were idiots there, I could just try to find some other people somewhere else. But I like went to New York City. I was interning in New York City, and ended up having to leave there because I wasn't making it. I was like, maybe I'll make it, maybe I'll get hired somewhere. I didn't get hired anywhere, and then ended up having to take a job in Omaha, Nebraska, where my brother worked. His job, which was a legal support company, is so like I went down even further. It was so depressing moving from New York City to Omaha. But during that move, I met my wife, and so we got married quickly after we met, and then started our family and stuff. And well, through all that, I was trying to deal with basically all the questions that my culture and inside me was trying to deal with, which was atheism and theism and evolution and what does it mean to be a Christian? Like, who is God? Where, like, how are we saved? Like all that stuff. I'm like, and I remember sort of making the choice because one of my friends became an atheist. And I was like, I'll go all the way, except I don't think I'll ever be able to give up God, because God was just sort of foundational reality. And so I was like, everything else can go. Everything. Like, I don't, if it means. So like, I kind of just was like, and then I kind of had this idea of like, if I fall, whatever catches me is God.
Mhm.
So that was where kind of my postmodern deconstruction just took me. And I was like, well, I'll hit reality at some point. And if I don't, then at least we'll know.
Okay, so this, if I can pause here, like
Mhm.
that for me is the power of the postmodern, right? Because like one of the things that frustrates me with where Jordan Peterson is he's so stuck in this frame where he's fighting something.
Yep.
And I'm like, man, look, no, you don't understand. Like, you need the postmodern critique. Like you don't follow it from the space of ego, which is myself as the subject here who is in charge of reality and I'm the judge. If you follow it from that space, then it leads you to like total nihilism. It leads you to total disconnection from reality. It leads you to hell itself. But if you take that tool and you use it from the place of just like radical abject humility, which is where you're coming from in this story, right? Which is where whatever is real is God, and I am not going to decide what God is, and I am not going to decide what is real. I'm going to go and find out. Like, then the postmodern critique is like, oh man, like that, then it's amazing.
Right. Because I mean, really, like, this is probably similar to your experience, but like a lot of my Christianity was just materialism and rationalism.
Yeah.
And so all that needed to go. I didn't have the words for that. I didn't have the words for materialism and rationalism at the time. All I had was sort of what was happening in the culture, which was the emergent church and sort of postmodernism, which helped deconstruct that. But I didn't have like a firm place to land. I didn't have a floor yet, Shari. But I figured that would be the hand of God that would catch me as I fell. But all this is like internal. Like on the outside, I'm trying to have a stable life for my family, and we're going to church, and like I'd have conversations with my wife every now and then about this stuff, and she didn't like it. Like I was reading a book about kind of the historical Jesus, and I was just bringing up a point to her about like maybe Jesus wasn't actually this, it was actually that, and she just started crying. She's like, why are you like, she wasn't like mad at me or angry. She just she just couldn't take it. And I was like, all right.
See where you were.
Yeah.
You could see where you were, is what she could see.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so we've been talking about our personal stories. I'm curious as to, for both of you then, with your partners, where things have gone and and sorry, maybe you're not done. I apologize.
Well, I just wanted to say one thing. This was kind of tied to something that happened in your Vervaeke conversation when he talked about Christ saying, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?
Mm-hmm.
And then your idea of like following the Logos wherever you go, and then Shari following the Logos wherever it went, and her actually finding God out in, in nature. And then that's actually the church. And so there is like a foundational reality
Mm-hmm.
that it seems like is there. But as far as like there is a going out and coming back that's a part of this sort of journey that that makes us who we are. And so we actually have to leave home and then return. And so both those are important. So the postmodern critique helped me leave home, and then Peterson helped me come back, roughly speaking. and Shari, maybe it's similar for you. Like you left, you found God, and then you actually came back. You're like, now you're baptized Orthodox. Like that's a sort of a coming home for you.
Well, they call it coming home. They say welcome home,
Right.
But the home that I'm welcome to there feels very expansive, whereas the home that I was in was very small and very stale and very like windowless and doorless, and I don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah.
Whereas this home is under the dome, it's under the dome, it's cosmic. And so like you were talking about constraint earlier, right? And there's something I listened to years ago. I listened to it was a podcast before there were podcasts, a radio show on CBC radio about advertising. This guy has this, weekly, what does he call it? The Art of Persuasion or something. And it's very interesting. He talks about the psychology of it and stuff. Anyway, he was recommending he did a whole thing on constraint and the beauty of constraint. And I remember hearing that and knowing what he was talking about, because the beauty of constraint is that it provokes or incites or germinates or ferments creativity in people, right? And I mean, I know that from living on the land. So, you're in Telegraph Creek, we were like 800 kilometers from the nearest hardware store. And if you needed something,
like some nails or something,
or a piece of wire or something, right? And you didn't have it, well, then you got really creative really quickly, right? And so when he was talking about this, I was like, yeah, this is exactly what fosters creativity, right? Is this constraint, but the constraint has to be, and then I know this from raising my livestock, the constraint has to allow for personal freedom at the same time, right? So like I've got fences everywhere to keep my sheep in or my horses in, but I have to make sure that the space that they're in is big enough for them to exercise personal choice, right? So that they're not just eating the same old grass every day because they only have, half an acre or a quarter of an acre to eat off of. But I have to give them lots of acres so they can have some raspberry and some this and some that, and right, it maintains their physical health, but it also maintains their mental health, right? They're not stuck without a choice. They're not prisoners. I don't want any of them to feel like prisoners, right? Because I know what it feels like to be a prisoner. And I can't stand the thought of my animals feeling like prisoners.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, they're constrained. They're constrained by the fences, right?
Yeah.
And so that's always been for me what the church should look like. It should have parameters that, and the reason my horses and my sheep are constrained by fences is because it's for their safety, right? Because if they were not, like I actually had it happen where my horses were not constrained by fences and they all went out and disappeared on me, and then only some of them came back and one died. One was killed by a predator, right? And so that was on me because I didn't have a fence. So I had to build a fence, right? And so it's a balance, and it's a very fine balance. I don't know why we started talking about, what was your question, Jess, now?
Well, it was about Christ being forsaken, this going out and coming back.
Oh, the withdrawal. Yeah,
Well, can I pick up on that constraint aspect a little bit? Because you raised a lot of thoughts there for me, and I want to explore it because this is a space that I'm having a hard time exploring for myself. So, and I'm going to say that my response is going to be framed by the space that I'm in, which is I feel a constraint from my perspective towards the church. So it may not even be the church's issue. It might be my perspective of the church.
Yeah.
Which of the Orthodox Church has it's a fairly filled out frame in a really deep way, but not in the practical sense. It's not very filled out at all in the practical sense. I don't know what it's like to go to an Orthodox church, really. So the thing that I think about with constraints, like you're saying, is I very much see how the constraints of the arena you're put in afford you space to become creative. That makes sense to me. That makes a lot of sense. But the thing that I am really concerned about in that sense is that the constraint that I'm coming up against that is generating the creativity is not artificial.
Right.
It needs to be and it can't be, and in order for it not to be artificial, it can't be, kind of man-made. It can't be made from the space of
it can't be a fence. It can't be a fence.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And like, but that's at the highest level, right?
That's
at the level of
fails. Actually.
Yeah. Well, that's
fence.
Well, and that's, no, and I'm not trying to fault you here. I'm just trying to think through it, because it's like, I also see the space in which I need those fences generated, especially in specific areas of my life. Because one of the things I've noticed in this whole journey is that I'm much more able to run, and I use the analogy of mountain climbing. I'm able to run up the mountain towards God and explore space with much more ability and energy and all that kind of stuff, to the degree that my day-to-day life is kind of automated, right? Like, as I place in practice habits and just modes of being in my daily life that I don't have to work on, they don't cause me friction in my life, then I have all this space where I can move towards God at a deep level. And so I very much appreciate the constraints on that level. And I'm wondering if maybe that's the way in which it might be optimal to orient towards this idea of church, is that it provides that space on those higher levels, such that as you come down to this really like deep core contemplative, root awareness as naked awareness, striving towards God, you're more able to get there. Does that seem like?
Well, I don't know, when you were talking about it, I was actually thinking about what the constraints are within the Orthodox Church. And like I said, there aren't very many. What I think about as constraints, God-given constraints, not man-made ones, are the body and time. Those are our constraints, right? And we have to live within them. And those are the things that push us towards creativity. Because what? We run out of time and our bodies fail us, right? Like, necessity is the mother of invention. I'm sure somebody that wasn't feeling good invented a wheelchair. I'm positive. Right?
Yeah.
That wanted to keep getting around. So, and if I think about those God-given constraints, and I translate those into, let's say, the Orthodox Church, for example, I see that there. So the Orthodox Church has a liturgical calendar, for one thing, okay? There's time. So you're caught up in a liturgical sense of time. And then within that calendar, you're going to be faced with fasting and kneeling and, right? And liturgies that are full of, sounds and smells and so on. And there's your body. And that's how I see it within the church. Where I came from, the constraints were all rules based. They were all fences. They were all man-made, right? And be like, once burnt, twice shy, So it's like, I don't want to go into any man-made anything anymore, right? I'm not doing that. But I explored Orthodoxy for, I don't know, I think like 2.5 years, 3 years almost, before I did, got baptized. And I just couldn't find the things that I was afraid of in there. I couldn't find them anymore. They weren't there, right? And I saw the cosmic nature of the church, even within the architecture of the church. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I see, I'm really simple and basic in the way I think about things. Like, I don't want to take them too far, because I think that we are essentially simple and basic creatures. And the Orthodox Church just seems, and I don't want to make this a preach about the Orthodox Church, but this has to do with why I went where I went and why it's so miraculous to me, I think, because I wasn't willing to give up what I already had, and I didn't have to. That's really what I'm saying.
Yeah, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And to get back to what Jess was talking about the withdrawal of God, that was one of the things that when you and John Vervaeke were talking, jumped out at me, because he found that hard, which I didn't notice upon first listening to your conversation, but when I listened to it the second time, I heard him saying it, to reconcile that to Trinitarianism, right? How does Christ fall out of the Trinity? Right, essentially, that's what he's saying. But there's this idea of fully God and fully man, right? And I was in a catechism class, and my priest was talking about the Eucharist, and he said, some people will tell you that you don't have to worry about getting sick from the Eucharist because it's the Eucharist, okay? Because it's Christ's body and Christ's blood. But he said, but the Eucharist is bread and wine too, okay? So, and then he made the comparison to Christ, fully human and fully divine, right? And the Eucharist is fully bread and fully wine and fully Christ and fully God, right? Why am I saying this? Oh, okay. So yeah, back to this Trinitarian thing. So if you think about the withdrawal of God, the my God, why hast thou forsaken me? It makes sense, right? That the fully human experienced the withdrawal of God on the cross, right? Even though it was fully God, or he was fully God.
So how does that happen for you? That's
the big question. Like, I'm not going to try to answer that one, because like, how could you answer that, right? But
well, so I've been trying, right?
No.
So this is what I'm trying, because I started in on it there with Vervaeke, and then we got sidetracked.
Yeah.
And I'm actually glad we did, because this is something that I had thought about some before, but not really deeply. And, you know, so to frame before I start talking about this, like one of the reasons that I'm talking with Vervaeke about this is from the perspective that I see it now. I think that Vervaeke is, like, he's more Christian than Christian.
Yeah.
Like, he is more a follower of the way than is possible to be while believing the Christian narrative as it stands today.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, what I'm trying to do then is try to figure out, how does that work? Because, like, from everything that I've ever been able to interact with of his, which is a significant amount, he seems to embody a lot. He embodies what it means to follow Christ.
Right.
And I don't understand, like, this, and this is one of the things, is like, I don't understand how that works and doesn't connect to the narrative for him. And so, but I think it's around this thing, because I think one of the things at the bottom of this is the issue of how we perceive, like, I realize in order to answer this question, you have to have a complete sense of picture of who is God, who is man, especially in relationship to God. How does sin actually work metaphysically? And how does the redemption of Christ metaphysically bind all things together that exist? Because, like, you have to do it from the level of ontology with metaphysics. And, like, until you get that whole picture, this question, and of course this is the question, because it's the last words Jesus says before he dies, right? Like, it's like the metaphysical ontological key is like, okay, somehow God had to not become God. Like, but
I don't know if you can think about it like that. This is the thing, right?
Yeah,
like,
okay.
Not become that, like, somehow, I don't know if I'll be able to articulate this very well, but somehow there's a linear progression there. And it's not linear, it's a circle, right? It's a whole thing. And this is, we always want to talk about first and last, and Jesus made very sure that was a big, huge tangled mess. Okay. He made very sure not to let us get hung up on that, because our constraint, right, is time, which is this, and our bodies. Those are our constraints. And we can't imagine timelessness. We can't imagine the first being last and the last being first. That sounds like nonsense to us, right? So, and this is why, like, when my priest talked about the bread and the wine and compared that to the fully God, fully human, I was like, oh, I see that now. I see what this is, theosis. Okay. This is, and what is theosis? I mean, if you wanted to make it a modern term, you could call it integration. That's what you could call it. So you have these two distinct things that become one thing. Okay. And we know that language, right? The two becoming one.
Yeah, it's all about participation. It's all about the whole and the parts and the whole coming together.
Right. It's about the one and the many. It's about unity and multiplicity. It's all that stuff, right? And how is that preserved? Like, because with Jesus, what Jesus shows us is that he could be both those things at the same time, right? That they were particular, which means to me that they're sacred, right? Each one of those things is sacred. God and human to me. Okay. And so I'm not saying that Jesus set aside his divinity. I don't want to say that because I don't know what he did. But I do know that he was fully human and fully God. And so as a fully human, he could suffer the withdrawal of God. Because why? Because I do. Right?
Yes.
I do.
Yes.
And that's my only explanation.
Yeah,
And
like I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I think we're having a translation issue in the way that we're using the language.
But I think
No, you're fine.
He could elaborate on the withdrawal really. He elaborates on that really well, better than I could.
Well, I mean, in terms of the Trinity, this is how I think about it. Is like if you think of God in his totality, it's something like everything all at once. And there's no differentiation in it within God himself. He's the fullness of everything all at the same time. And so how does a God like that create? Where does he create? If you know, like people will say, like, what if we're just in the imagination of God? Or what if we're all just part of God and we don't have our own actual being? This is all an illusion. You know, like people get to that where that's all everything is. It's just everything all at once, and there's nothing else. But I think that's not creation. That's God dreaming or thinking or something. Like in order for something to actually become real, in a sense, there has to be a space that it can inhabit. That's not everything all at once. And so that's like I see that. I think about it really spatially. I think of it as God filling everything everywhere, and then there's this space that opens up, and that's essentially the void. It's nothingness. It's the tohu wabohu. It's chaos. It's something unknown, but it's also wisdom. It's also the spirit. Could
it be a womb?
It's the feminine. Yeah.
It's your mind. It's your mind. This is literally what your mind is. Your mind is the space between your awareness and the fullness of awareness that is God.
Yeah. So there's this space open up, and then something can be created in that's real, but it has to be separate from the transcendent.
Yeah.
It can share connection to the transcendent, which we would consider love. That's how we're connected.
It has to be connected, right?
Right. And this is the unity multiplicity thing. So we're all united in love, but within our multiplicity, we actually have real being that was gifted to us.
We're particular.
Right. So in order for those things to actually be real and not just be, like God withdraws, sends us out. We're even, you could even say, it's interesting because it's like you could be cast away or you could be incarnate. Like those things are, but the end result is real being. And this is the creative, this is how I formulate the creative process of how, like, and that's why they say Christ is the foundation of creation. And he's actually part of, like, that's part of the Godhead. It's, that's the Trinity includes Christ, which is the foundation of creation, which everything imitates, we'll say. So you have the original Logos, which is the one thing that had being within the space that God withdrew from, and then everything else comes into being. I like the idea of God. It's like God the Father loves the Son so much that he just wants more Son. He wants more sons and daughters, and everything comes into being through that. There was something I read in the book Ethics to Beauty, where it talks about God unveiling himself to the void, and the void responds in creating everything. God speaks, let there be, and then it responds with the trees and the land and the animals and the birds, and everything responds to him as the beauty of the transcendent is unveiled. But the withdrawal is real, but God uses it because he wants real beings. He wants real sons and daughters. He doesn't want puppets or figments of his imagination. And so,
So what do you want, right? What do you want?
You can't withdraw personal agency.
No.
Like that's a fundamental axiom.
Yeah. And so if God really wants real beings and he pours himself out to give life.
Well, what amazes me is that he actually cares about what you want. Right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, he puts those desires into your heart. I think I'm thinking about George MacDonald. George MacDonald says, when God wants a drama, he creates a Shakespeare. And then he says to Shakespeare, what do you want? Right? Because he knows that Shakespeare is going to produce all of this amazing stuff, right? Because that's what God wants. He wants the drama. So he makes the Shakespeare, he makes the person. And the person has to be real so that whatever they co-create with God is also real, right?
So if I can throw a few things on here. One of them is the issue of freedom, right? One of the things we're talking about here is being free to choose. And like Vervaeke's helped me a lot with this, of seeing that, okay, freedom, the whole idea of free will is kind of ridiculous because it presupposes a disconnectedness from reality. Right? So from the frame of myself as constrained to time and body, I cannot postulate free will because I'm constrained. So there's a sense in which free will as myself being any kind of unmoved mover is not, I just can't go there. It's like you can maybe kind of talk about it, but you can't make it a thing. But it's also the case that what I truly want, if I'm really free, and Paul you see Paul wrestling with this in Romans, if I'm truly free, I will be free only to do the good.
Yes.
Right? And so there's this way in which, as the self, whatever the self is, on the level that it's talked about of flesh, at the level that it's talked about as ego or whatever you want to use, the self, as the self falls away, I become less and less a like haphazard agent. I become more agentic, but my choices are actually more constrained because I'm actually going to follow my relevance realization.
That's that reciprocal narrowing.
Yeah.
Right, but also reciprocal opening. Like it's a weird thing because you're doing both at the same time. Like you can see more, but you know exactly what the best thing is, and you want the best thing because that's how you became real. So it's weird. This is where everything becomes a paradox on the level we're talking now, because you have to say it is this way, but it's also not this way.
Yeah, there's an interesting Maximus the Confessor has the idea that we have two wills. We have a natural will and a gnomic will, right? The one that deliberates is the gnomic will, and that Christ only had the natural will, which was always to will the good, right?
Yes.
And so there's this whole idea of choice, right? And I've thought about choice. What is happening when we choose? And Eve chose, right? And what did she do? She took. So there's an action that happens there. She possesses.
Having mode instead of the being mode.
Right, exactly. And so this is what Maximus points out with the gnomic will is the deliberation to possess, right? To have. And then whatever it is you have becomes a weapon. I think that's the only thing that can happen to it, is that you begin to wield it, right?
Well, part of that is like, in order to have anything, you must first be. And in order to be, you have to decide that there is something that you are. And this is something that I was talking about with John a little bit, is like, in order to be in a space where I can say, I have this, then I have to stand somewhere. And in order to do that, I have to decide what is real. And then I'm deciding what's real. I become the arbiter of the real. Like that's actually the move of original sin, is to get to the space where I'm no longer just flowing with reality. I'm actually projecting. I mean, postmodernism and Jean-Paul Sartre's work is essentially, from my perspective, is essentially the purposeful, articulated working out of original sin. When he says man's existence is his essence, and he's saying the core of what you are is whatever you will yourself to be into the next moment. And that's the inverse of what's true, because what's true is that what I am at my core is I can never know what it is, because it's like it's so beyond what I could possibly hold in my mind. It's so beyond what I could possibly hold in my thoughts, so beyond what I could possibly hold in my propositions. It's actually somewhat consonant with our idea of God.
It's all, it's infinite. It's the image of God, right?
Exactly. And this is why, okay, now if we can go back to this whole thing with Christ on the cross, because this is what I want to say, is like, in order to get what Christ says on the cross, you have to actually understand that, to the degree that God came through Christ, God wants to come through you. It's the same thing. It's just there's a you that's in the way. And when Christ was here, there was never a gnomic will that was in the way. He only had the natural will.
Right. So he never chose to possess. That's really exactly what happened, right? He never chose to possess. And like you were saying in your conversation with John, you said, I don't feel the need to be right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what happens when you possess something? Now it's yours, right? And you have every right. Now you have to defend it. Okay.
Bring on clothes.
That's right. So if you don't possess anything, then you have nothing to defend. Okay. You don't have to be right.
Yep. Exactly. Yes. That's exactly right. And so when Christ on the cross, in order for all things to exist, and I will zoom all the way back to the ontology aspect of being itself.
Mm-hmm.
If something is not connected to God, it does not have being. Right? And original sin is somehow the core of who we are, being disconnected from God.
I don't know. Well, okay. Maybe
at least on some level, right?
Can we be disconnected from God though? See, this is the thing. Like, we talk about the withdrawal, right? But
so
what is that? Is that a disconnection, or is that a hiddenness? I think it's a hiddenness. Okay.
So I think it depends on the posture, right? Like, on the posture where the self is actually like trying to work out, and I'm committing original sin in my actions more and more and more. I get to the place where I'm so far from God that I actually live in hell. And then if I die in that state, in some way, the essential self that was willed into being by God, that was created into the potential of reality, that could have existed, never becomes actualized, right?
Yeah.
Well, we can't do away with sin here, right?
Oh, well, okay.
Well, I mean, I think Jesus actually does, right? But in our ontology, we have to have an ontology that includes it, right? Or am I wrong about that? I mean, I may be wrong. Like, I don't care, but
well, I don't know. I haven't given it a whole lot of thought, but
So let me finish this, and maybe it'll make more sense.
Okay.
Because what I'm trying to say is something like, okay, there's the image of God that is created in each of us, and for that image to become the likeness, I have to, in every moment of my life, have the fullness of the light of the divine that could shine through that moment. It has to be allowed to shine through. And when I commit sin, I'm basically disallowing some amount of that light to shine through my life. And thus the actuality that becomes realized of my life is lesser than whatever would be the actual likeness of God.
I think about sin. I don't know. See if my analogy works. I think about sin as the hot and cold game. You know, when you were a kid, someone would hide something and then they, you know, you'd move towards it and they'd say, oh, cold,
Colder,
warmer, hot, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's what sin is. It's we do have a natural will. We do move towards the good. I would propose that everybody is moving towards the good, even when they're doing bad things, you know, and that's another conversation. But
yeah, all evil is the privation of the good.
So, you know, the idea that sin is missing the mark, that's how I interpret it. Okay. As the hot and cold game. It's like, no, you're way off. It's over there, you know.
Totally.
And eventually, with all the cues you get from the world around you, you move closer and closer to the reality, let's call it, right? And you know, you were talking about hell and a disconnection from God. I think that hell is when you see your nakedness, right? It's when Adam and Eve look down and see their nakedness, and suddenly they're in hell. Okay, they're cast out of the garden. They're in the thorns. They're digging in the dirt. They're having, you know, children, and it's painful, and people are dying, and all that stuff is happening, right? That's hell. And there's a guy named Douglas Harding. Have you heard of him? Okay. And he has this quote that I love so much. He says, he's talking about the 4 stages of life. And he says that when you get to the 3rd stage, which is teenagerhood, so you've got newborn, toddler, teenager, and seer. Okay. And in the teenage stage, he said, which is where most people stay, the teenager suddenly is confronted with their image in the mirror, and they say to themselves, I am what I look like. Okay. And that's what Adam and Eve do in the garden. They look down and they say, I am what I look like, right? And then he says here, that is hell in the end. I am what I look like is hell. It's hell. You can't live from that. What I look like is dying. What I am isn't. It's all about death and life. That's his quote, right? And so for me, what I try to do is I try to show people how death is life and life is death in that sense, right? That to think that this is all, right? That what I look like, right? This is it. That is hell. And that is nihilism, right? This is all there is. This is all we've got, right?
So I'm curious in terms of, like, I can follow you. I don't disagree with any of that. I just see that as being a different level than the, like, whatever the beingness that is me, and how, like, so would you say that that sin then creates an illusion of reality that upon death just disappears? Or I'm a little bit, that's the part where I'm not sure if I'm missing you or something.
Do you want to say something, Jess?
I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna. Like, what? Do you know Peter Rollins?
I'm not sure that I know that name.
He's been around for years. He's a Christian sort of postmodern thinker. He's a psychoanalyst, theologian. Like, he likes Lacan and Zizek. You know Zizek?
A little bit.
Okay. So anyway, he talked for a while about the three things in a magic trick: the pledge, the turn, and the prestige. It's basically the Christian story. So the pledge, I'll just read this here. First comes the pledge. The magician shows you something relatively ordinary, like a dove. The second is the turn, and the magician takes the dove and makes it do something extraordinary, like disappear. Finally, there's the prestige. The magician tops that disappearance and makes the dove reappear. And so pledge, turn, prestige. And this is the U-shaped journey is what I call it. It's birth, death, and resurrection. And we, sin, death, it's all the downhill side of that U-shaped journey. Also postmodernism, like who was it? I think it's N.T. Wright said postmodernism is the doctrine of the fall preaching to an arrogant modernity. And so the postmodernism is the fall, and that's also deconstruction. It's all this downhill stuff. It's falling apart. It's going into multiplicity. It's all this stuff. But and so often we, I don't know whether it's like physics or, like how we're taught in school to think about things, but we always think like everything just falls apart naturally. And then like that's the most natural thing, sort of a nihilistic falling apart, dying, everything else. But what the Christian story says is that the resurrection side is just as natural and probable. In fact, it's just a pattern that repeats. With death comes resurrection.
As a side note, this is why I think evolution, like Christians should be the most thrilled about accepting evolution as a theory. Because evolution actually postulates this as the way that things come into being.
Yeah. Well, and so I think of, as far as like sin and the fall, like that it's part of the pattern, and that is the going out and coming back. It's the going away and coming home. It's the going up the mountain. Actually, it's going down the mountain and going back up, or however it works.
Breathing in and out. It's the breathing in and out.
It's breathing in and out. This is the pattern, and this is actually the creative pattern. This is how things come into being. It's the withdrawal of God, and then the return of this, and then the love of the creation. It's how unity and multiplicity is connected. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but in this view of things, sin is not a problem. Sin is just a downhill part of the pattern that God's already involved in, because this is the withdrawal in order for the Son to be begotten. It's
like if you have a child and they're learning something, do you want them to learn would you rather they learn by their mistakes or they never ever made a mistake? Yes. Like you just laid it out for them in such a way that there was no failure ever involved. Like which one of those children would have the better chance at survival in the world?
Yes. So,
or which would actually be like a real person.
Yeah.
A person doesn't exist until, I use the example of the father teaching his kid to ride a bike. Mm-hmm. At some point, the father lets go of the bike. Like, in reality, and the son either pedals and keeps going or crashes or stops or whatever the son does. The son, whatever happens will happen, but the son needs to become a person, needs to become a bike riding person. The father wants the son to know how to ride a bike because the world opens up when you have a bike to ride. You can go all sorts of places and do all sorts of things. And so, but there's that point where the father has to let go. And this is the prodigal son. This is why the father has no problem handing over half his estate to his young, belligerent, idiot son. Mm-hmm. Because and the son doesn't even return for the right reason. The son is just like, well, he's good to the servants. Maybe I can become a servant. He doesn't even think that he would be a son again.
He doesn't understand sonship.
He doesn't understand sonship at all. And the father's trying to teach him. And there's no way to understand sonship until you
go through it all.
Yeah. because the older brother who stayed, played it safe and did nothing, just waiting for whatever, he didn't understand his father either, because he's like, why are you throwing the party? You never even gave me and my friends a goat to have a party with.
Yes. Yeah.
And the father's like, you
Nobody-
never
nobody
even
gets
asked
it.
me. You never asked.
Yeah. So I'm 100% on, I can see all of that stuff. And so if I can try to characterize where I'm trying to talk about, and maybe where we're getting hung up here, is that where we're talking about and what you guys are describing, when I'm listening to that, I'm looking at the Christian story from the level of where the arc of sin, the fall, and redemption is a lower arc. And I'm outside of that and looking back at it. Is that fair? Is that where you're at when you're thinking about that?
The arc of sin, the fall, and redemption?
Yeah, just like the level of the story that is human fallenness.
Mm-hmm.
My perspective, my participatory perspective of being myself is now, I can see that as being the lower story arc of all of reality. That is not all of reality to me.
No.
Right.
Well, see, the way Jess and I talk about it is a U shape, right? So you're talking about the bottom of the U,
right?
We have birth, death, and then resurrection. But this U shape is not just, it's not one, it's not a linear storyline.
Yeah.
It's happening every day, right? In your life and in the life of the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I see all that, but what I'm wanting to zoom in on is how to communicate, how to build the bridge for people who are stuck in the perception of that being the whole story, because that's where I was for a long time, right?
Oh, okay.
So I'm trying to build the bridge back there when I'm talking about like when I'm talking about the Jesus separating from his body, or using that kind of language, I'm using it from being inside that frame looking out, because I can't see the whole picture, right? So that's what I'm trying to do here, is not like, I'm happy to move to this level, and I love talking about this stuff, but part of where we were going there, and where I was hoping to fill out a little bit, is just is this bridge, how so one of the things is, like, now that I can see it from this perspective, where I live now, whatever I am, is that it's so much more beautiful. It's so much more affording. Life is like, life and the story of Christ, the idea of God, like all this stuff, it means something. It's real. It's embedded in the reality that I live. But I also very clearly can remember a state of being in time where all those stories, all those ideas were dead.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to look at a way to form propositions such that there is a bridge built, that version of myself can just look at it and be like, oh, and then walk out.
Yeah.
It's easier.
This is the question I keep asking myself, is like, how do you make someone see?
Yeah.
How do you get someone to see?
Yeah.
How do you preach the gospel? That's what we're talking about.
This is telling the more beautiful story, Jess and I call it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, here's the thing. You can say this and people will object to it. Like we talk about it and we're like, yeah, we totally get it. And then there's other people that will be like, what are you doing? And this is, we've talked about, me and Shari have talked about this before. Basically, what opened up the world to you and made this amazing, more affording space that's free and expansive and beautiful and whatever. Some people like peer out from behind the tree they're behind, and they're like, that scares me to death, because if I go out there, I'm vulnerable. It's open. It's an open space. I'd rather stay within my closed walls, because I need to be safe. And so I think this is what Paul's talking about people with a weaker faith and with stronger faith. And he's like, and he's even like, don't disparage those with weaker faith and don't make them stumble and fall. And who's the one, Shari, that said, don't scare people with your joy?
Rilke.
Yeah, Rilke says, don't frighten people with your joy or your hope. And like I've had these conversations with people, and they're just like, this
Jess
is
always
terrible.
This. How do I make people see? And I often talk to Jess about it in these terms, like, for example, with the open space. So this is interesting. I always think this is worth thinking about. Predators move in straight lines. Okay, so I've trained horses, and when you work with horses, you don't move in straight lines. Okay, unless of course you're bonded and it's all, they know who you are and all that.
Simpatico.
But when you work with horses, you have to approach at angles. Okay, you have to approach in a zigzag pattern, and that is how prey animals approach everything. Okay, because they're vulnerable. They also have their eyes on the sides of their head, so they have like a 360-degree view of their surroundings. So if they're moving towards a watering hole, they can keep the watering hole within their, vision, but at the same time, they can move at angles to the watering hole. A predator comes out of the bushes and moves into the open space, straight line, okay? When a predator moves in a straight line, all the prey animals will run, okay? But if a predator lays down and starts rolling in the grass, all the prey animals will just continue to eat around it. I've seen grizzly bears grazing with my horses, okay? But as soon as they move in a straight line, okay, so now, and this is what I've told Jess, when you're talking to people, don't move in straight lines.
It's propositions, right?
It's
Would that be
straight
propositions?
on
Is like,
propositions.
yeah.
You're going to scare the crap out of them because we are both prey and predator. Okay, that's what a human being is. So we have all the feelings, right? And this gets to some of the stories Jesus told, like the parable of the sower, or the workers in the vineyard or whatever. Like, our constraints again come into play. We're in a hurry, right? We only have so much time, right? We want people to enjoy a quality to their life, but they only have so much quantity of a life, right? In order to do that. But to God, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter how long it takes. It doesn't, right? And so yeah,
it's like detachment with agape, right? It's like the end of John and I's conversation. What we were talking about there is that you don't wake people up by yelling at them when they're asleep, or they won't want to be awake, right? You have to just open space
it's all about space.
With calling, just place your attention on them in such a way as to afford them the most opening that you can to the good,
the most opening that they can handle.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you open it too wide, sometimes people will be like, eh, and they're not going to go out.
It becomes the falling off place that Peterson talks about, right?
Yeah.
And it's just the abyss that Nietzsche's talking about, right? Then it's just this dark hole of the unknown, and nobody's going to go near that.
Well, because it's like you can't jump out into the emptiness.
No.
Of becoming nobody, right? You can't just do that while you're still somebody, while you're still needing to have all these things in order to be safe, like you're talking about. You can't just jump off.
This is kind of what happened with Jess when he said he had that experience when he was mountain biking, but he already had been having to answer the question, what do you want? And the thing is, that's a huge question to ask someone what they want, because then they have to know what they want. And most people don't know what they want because they don't know who they are. And then that journey, and you already know this, Ken, leads you to God.
Yeah, because like the years before God asked me that, like we're kind of like, it was fun. Like I was doing this and that and here and there, but it was sort of wandering, and like, I didn't know, like I would think I was know where I was going, and I'm like, I don't know where I'm going. And then it was there's this movie called Spy Game. Have you ever seen it? It's Robert Redford and Brad Pitt. I love the movie. It's kind of an obscure movie. But so Robert Redford's a CIA agent, and he's trying to recruit Brad Pitt, who's a sniper from Vietnam, and he's a really good shot. And so he's like, I want to recruit this guy. And the way he recruits him is he basically, through manipulation, he gets him assigned to like some weird backwater office in Western Germany, where he's like shuffling papers on a desk, where he was like an army ranger sniper, and now he's like doing desk work. He keeps him there for like years, just waiting for him to become frustrated, so that when he comes in and offers this thing, it sounds amazing to him, and he'll do it. And like I kind of like I I I think God does that to us. Not so much, he's not manipulating like that, but he'll let us just sit until we figure it out. He's like, I have all the time. God is patient, and and uh and he'll just wait until you're ready.
Well,
And then
this
when
is
you
how he approached everything in the interactions I found, anyways. These interactions were always, these were the things that made me fall in love with him. Okay, because he didn't say, I've heard about you, I know you, right? He said, where's your husband? And he wanted her to be honest with who? Herself. That's who he wanted her to be honest with, right? And it's the journey inward that is that reciprocal narrowing that opens you up, right? To that. That's the flip that you're talking about.
Yeah, the flip is going through the eye of the needle. You have to take things to their end. Like my experience when I was like, I'm going to listen to God and I'm going to do exactly what he says. And then God doesn't say anything. And then when he actually does say something, he asks me a question of what I want. And so like that whole flip happened to me because I went to the end. And a lot of times those fences that you're talking about, those constraints, keep us from going to the end because we're afraid. Because you don't want to go to the falling off place. You don't want to go into the open space. And so what you do is you actually keep yourself from going to the end, for good reasons. Going to the end can get you killed too. And but if my view is, if you can get to the end, it flips, and then there's a resurrection that happens.
If you get to the falling off place and you're stuck in your own sense of yourself as subject of reality, you're Nietzsche. If you get to the end place and you're surrendered, you're, Meister Eckhart or whoever you want to.
Yeah.
Because like, John in his, did either of you watch the conversation that John had with Claire Carlisle last week, Spinoza's Religion? It's a really good one.
Yeah.
But at the end, they're talking about faith and how faith is like the choice to believe that all things actually are, that all things actually exist, really. Yeah. And Claire asked John, she says, does that faith ever waver for you? And his answer was so beautiful, because he said, in a sense, but what happens is that if that really starts wavering for me, I just let it be there. I just go into it, and you go through it. You go through the eye of the needle, and you have the courage to be.
Yep.
It also takes, here, I just want to read you this Gregory of Nyssa quote.
I love Gregory.
Our mind functions by using intervals within time. You talked about that, right? So how can it grasp God's nature, which is not subject to temporal extension? Through the medium of time, the inquisitive mind always leaves behind any thought older than what it just discovered. The mind also busily searches through all kinds of knowledge, yet never discovers the means to grasp eternity in order to transcend both itself and what we earlier considered, namely the eternal existence of beings. This effort resembles a person standing on a precipice. Okay. Let a smooth, precipitous rock, which abruptly falls off to a limitless distance, suggest this transcendence whose prominence reaches on high, while also falls to the gaping deep below. A person's foot can touch that ridge, falling off to the depths below, and find neither step nor support for his hand. To me, this example pertains to the soul's passage through intervals of time in its search for God's nature, which exists before eternity and is not subject to time. His nature cannot be grasped because it lacks space, time, measure, and anything else we can apprehend. Instead, our mind is overcome with dizziness and stumbles all over the place because it cannot lay hold of transcendent reality.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Like that, another way to talk about it is you have to fully be able to move outside of your mind. All concepts must become what they are, concepts. And you have to take every sense of the identity of yourself beyond the binary mode of thinking.
Would you think about that maybe as a lack of possession? Like I think about that as wanting to know what you don't want to know. That's how I actually can do it. Is like an insatiable curiosity.
Wonder.
Yeah. So that, and there, I guess, has to be some sort of faith that no matter where you go, you're held, right?
Yep. It's faith. Like that's literally what faith is.
Yeah.
Faith is like to jump.
Yeah.
To surrender and jump is that's faith.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the ways that I think of that too is that one of that commandment that thou shalt not take the Lord thy God's name in vain. The name of God is I am. And so one of the things that I have kind of attempted to do for a while now is not claim I am anything. So I try to be careful when I say all the different roles that I inhabit, to actually use the words, I do this, I whatever, and not actually use the words I am, just because there's this way in which the actual use of the words binds me into this frame within my own mind, and then I get all kind of caught up in something.
But what if we flipped that though, Ken?
Okay.
So Harding would argue that the toddler is completely participatory in being itself, because they say, I am Superman, I am the water, I am the tree, right? And this is how I would prefer to see the idea of I am, is that God is saying, and Jess and I have talked about this, in the beginning, God said, let there be, and then he says it, and it was good. Okay. And so what he's saying there is being is good. Okay. And Rilke says, the point is to live everything. And this is exactly what John Vervaeke's talking about when he says he sits with it, he embraces it, he moves in towards it, right? This is what jumping off the cliff is, okay? And knowing that you're held, right? Because you can say, I am, and it is good, right? I am being, and being is good. And this is the thing that I think most people, and if not most Christians, lack. Being, their Christianity has become Gnostic, where being is no longer good, right? And that they have to escape. They have to get to heaven. And one day being will be good. But God breathed his life into Adam, right? And he gave him a place to live. And he said, go forth and multiply. That is living. That is life. Multiplication is life, right? So I say, I am being, and being is good. And this allows me to rejoice in God always and again, like Paul said, even when it's not good, okay? Even when it feels bad, right? Because I know that I am being made.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
and we have the Whitestone name, or that we do have an identity, and it is hidden from us. So I think there's that idea that, like you said, there's a trap where you can over identify. You can be too locked into an identity.
Yeah.
But then there's also, because you're not the infinite, or you're not the transcendent, I should say, you do have a particularity. So you are something to God, and that's what it is kind of hidden from us. And so, to there's, to the degree that you understand that you're a son of God, or to God, however you want to say that, then like that's freedom and affording more than saying, than not saying that. That's how it feels to me anyway, of just being like, I am whatever I am. But being able to have, because like, it's, what is it, Revelation that has the Whitestone name, where like you have an identity, and it's just veiled, and then one day it'll be unveiled to you, and you'll be like, yes, that's who I am.
This is what Paul talks about in my favorite verse, which is, one day you will know as you are fully known, right? And so there will be this, what I call a simultaneous reciprocity of knowing, right? It'll be happening all at once, all at the same time. And I also posit that there won't be any need for language at that point, but whatever. That's my theory.
Well, there's a trap us.
But yeah, and I also think.
Oh, go ahead. What were you saying?
You guys are a little bit frozen for me.
Oh no, you're not frozen for us.
Am I good?
Yeah,
You're good. Yeah,
you're good. Also,
Okay.
I need to go in about 10-ish minutes.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, to wrap up the I am thing really quick. I agree with you. I don't want to dispense with beingness, or the goodness of being. I want to dispense with saying I am this, or I am
the over identification.
Just identification with anything that is graspable, that is
right.
Yeah.
The way you get out of that,
I don't like that either,
I find this happens a lot, especially in sort of Protestant situations. But like, say we were doing like a little Bible study, and it was the story of Jesus washing his disciples' feet. And then Peter says, no, Lord, don't wash my feet, wash my whole body. Or he says, don't wash my feet. And he's like, no, let me wash your feet. And he's like, if you wash my feet, wash everything of me. He's like, no, Peter, I just need to wash your feet, dude. and so then the conversation, then the questions for the Bible study were about, what do we need to do to wash people's feet? Like, how can we serve people? How can we do this? How can we do that? And then like that's the focus on ourselves, of what we're doing, what we can grasp, what we can do. And I was like, I just turned the question around. I was like, what is keeping you from letting Jesus wash your feet? And this is the turn from trying to fix how I see God, instead saying, no, how does God see me? And so this is also the Lacanian psychoanalysis, which is the other, the big other. That's what you're actually trying to deal with, is you think God hates you, and you won't say anything about it. All you do is you talk about what you want to do for him, and how you want to appease him and do things for him. And all under that is this sort of just ruminating thing, this fear that God actually hates you. And that's what you got to deal with. You actually have to come to terms with the fact of how God sees you. And first you have to admit that you think that God hates you. And, and only then you can kind of have you don't have to identify. You can be like, this is who my father thinks I am. And then, well, then we're as far into objective reality as I know how to get. And you can have an identity, but it's based in this relationship with the transcendent, rather than trying to build myself up.
Mm.
There's no subjective reality as real there.
Right.
Like this is one of the ways in which I see a lot of the church, at least how it's understood from a cultural perspective, as having gone so far sideways. And most of Protestantism is this way explicitly now, where it's a here's me as a subject, here's God as an object, and there's some kind of thing that has to happen. And that's like the cultural level of language around God. And it's like, okay, now that's not God, right? Like that God needs atheism, because like, I mean, that's the God that Nietzsche said died, and that
Yep.
God needed to die.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's not God. That's God made in our image.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So, well,
It was good. Thanks,
thank
Cam.
you. This was so fun.
Yeah,
It was
this
fun.
was good. Yeah. We talked about a lot and didn't really hone in on anything in particular. There were some things.
We didn't move in straight lines.
No, we did not. We zigzagged a lot, but that was fun though. Yeah.
It usually
well.
doesn't when you do just pure dialogos, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot. I'm going to stop the recording.